Was Jesus a pyromaniac? Find out this week on Talk Gnosis. Hi, welcome to Talk Gnosis for November 20th, 2013. I'm Bishop Kenneth Canterbury, and joining me this evening, as usual, is my lovely co-host, Bishop Lanny Peterson. How are you this evening?
I am just wonderful, Bishop Ken. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I want to apologize to our listeners off the bat. My dogs are being a little crazy tonight, so if you hear barking, it's two crazy Boston Terriers, Higgins and Mr. Higgins and Sir Finnegan. So, guys, try to be good this evening. Well, I think we're going to have an interesting show tonight. We're continuing our dialogue and our discussion upon the Gospel of Thomas. Mm-hmm. And tonight we are going to be discussing Gospel of Thomas, Logion 10.
Yep.
Which I think is a pretty interesting verse. You know, Jesus says, I have cast fire upon the world, and see, I am watching it over until it blazes.
Absolutely. It's really been on my mind all week. I read it. Actually, I'd read it back when we were doing our piece on the saying number 9. And I went on further and I read this, and that one of those verses that just really hit me. And boy, I'm setting the earth on fire and I'm just going to watch until it blazes. So we've got Jesus kind of like starting a forest fire, and it's just kind of growing and growing and growing and waiting for it to set up and just, blow up. So what do you think about this, Bishop Ken?
Well, I think that there's lots. I mean, my God, we could probably do a week's worth of shows just on fire alone.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think some of the symbolic, with fire. I mean, in Matthew 3:11, for an example, we get the whole entire, baptism of the Holy Spirit with fire. We're even in orders, for an example, we've got the idea of the sacred chrism, and the anointing with that oil being a representation of fire. Fire means so many things, I think, within the spiritual realm. We've got the alchemical meanings, how many episodes could we just go on to the alchemical symbolism there? I think, for me, it's the idea of kind of both, kind of a purification and a cleansing. Mm-hmm. In one way, I think that's one of kind of the representations there, because again, when we think of fire, we think of cleansing. Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of this fire that's kind of consuming, and he's watching it blaze, sort of this purification that's going to happen. Because if we compare that, I think, with what he says in Luke 12:49, which is pretty similar.
Yeah.
We've got, I have come to bring fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. But I have a baptism to undergo, and what constraint I am under it completely. Now, there's many more verses that we could go up on that, but there's a little bit difference in language there. Mm-hmm. There, he's going to bring the fire to the earth, but he wish it was already kindled. Here, he's cast the fire on the earth.
Yeah.
And he's watching it over till it blazes. That is some pretty powerful imagery.
Mm-hmm. It absolutely is. And I found it interesting with the passage in Luke, because he does go on to talk about how he has not come to bring peace on earth, but division, and talks about how he is going to set fathers against sons and mothers against daughters and in-laws against each other. Well, that's nothing particularly new under the sun there, but what you do have is we have a couple of different levels here. On one hand, we have the world system. What is he? Did Jesus, when he came, toss something in that started this friction going on, started this blaze in the world system, and eventually it can destroy, get rid of what's not necessary. It can purify by reducing things more down to different elements, but it can also transform. You and I know, you and I both like to cook, Bishop Ken. And one of the things that we do is we caramelize things. And when we apply heat to something, something different, something changes, and it makes our meats and our vegetables a lot more tasty. Mm-hmm. But there's a real transformation that brings about something very different. Once mm-hmm. something has been heated to that degree, once the fire has got on there, there can be a permanent change. Mm-hmm. And so we have that to think about. What kind of permanent change is Jesus trying to effect here? The other thing that I found interesting, this is partly because of my work in my fourth way work, is that Mr. Gurdjieff frequently spoke about the necessity of internal friction. Mm-hmm. Creating friction inside us, perhaps doing things that we don't like to do, or acting in ways that may be contrary to what we think of as our nature, in order to create friction inside us. And when you have that friction going, there can be some real transformation. There can be you can build up some heat and some friction. And here we have Jesus in Luke giving us this information about this household, in which now the members of the household are having friction within there, and that's stirring something up. So we were talking about internal work as well. Has something caught fire here, and as we continue to feed that fire in our own transformation, what are we getting rid of? Are we being purified? Yes, we are. Are things going to be destroyed in us? Things that maybe aren't necessary, but there can also be remarkable transformation if we are willing to continue feeding that fire in us.
I think those are some just awesome valid points you have there. One of the things that I had made notes on this also is, if we even go back kind of pre-Christianity and we kind of think of the Greek mythology and the story of Prometheus, we get... what is Prometheus doing? He's bringing, fire to humans as a tool. But this is something of the gods. Yeah. This is something that ultimately Prometheus gets kind of in trouble for. Why? Because he's giving them a gift of the immortals. And if we think even within that, I guess, symbolism here of this fire, we're given this divine gift of this fire that he is watching until it blazes. So he's given us this gift from the immortals that he's watching kind of, imagine the earth just kind of being consumed, by the Spirit, by this divineness that is being brought forth. And I think, there are just so many good symbols there. You brought up some great valid points is regarding like transformation, and that kind of goes even to kind of the alchemical things I'd mentioned earlier. Even if we just think in like basic chemistry, you put a gentle heat under a flask and you build up that flame till things start to bubble. And then it starts to spill over, and then now it starts condensing through your coil, and we get a distillation. Mm-hmm. And think about that in anything that we do, whether we're purifying water that is stagnant and not, suitable for drinking, whether we are taking the essence out of a plant and giving its fine, distillation into its pure essential oil. One of the things that always happens in this is that we are refining it to its purity. Mm-hmm. And I think, to me, that is one of the most kind of important kind of messages you kind of get from this whole entire passage, is kind of this refinement into its purity. But as you stated, this transformation may not be without pain, because not only can fire, bring things good, but it can cause great pain too. We can get burned by fire. It can cause disfiguration. It can cause hardship. It can cause pain, and I think that speaks kind of true about the spiritual path.
It absolutely does.
There's never gain without pain.
And it's he said, and again, I guess I'm going back to Luke here rather than just to Thomas, but I think it's important what's going on in Luke, and it's that he does not come to bring peace but a sword. This is not, as you point out, this is not a painless process, and this is a process that is going to involve active conflict. And even between people who are fairly close, and I think on a world system, we encounter this all the time. People, we do argue, people who believe that they are standing for something that is right or good or decent, we have to get into conflict with others who don't agree with us, and that's the sort of thing that's the sort of process that's going to happen. It's inevitable. If we turn tail and run, the friction's not going to be there, and the purification and the transformation cannot take place. The one thing that I also like, though, in Thomas is that he said that he is watching until it blazes. So we do not have a Jesus setting fire and himself turning tail. He is actually present during the blazing. So Jesus is there. Jesus is watching and has not abandoned us. I think I mentioned in the last passage that we looked at, I wasn't happy about Jesus as a sower, just tossing out seeds and going back to the farmhouse. But this one, we actually have, on one hand, a much more violent imagery, but we also have a Jesus who remains present. And of course, we can also turn our faces toward Jesus, even as it's all blazing. We have that there. So I thought I like that a lot.
Bishops, actually, if you don't mind if I jump in here, I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of the what you might call the Gnostic duelists kind of view of is Jesus here? Is he talking about destroying the world with fire? Do you think?
He says blazes. Gosh darn it.
I think that that could definitely be one interpretation of that, Tony. Kind of this destruction. I mean, God, we could go into another show on this one. But kind of, I mean, the idea of turning the world ablaze and then kind of its destruction, you know, in so many types of, you know, I guess apocalyptic type material, we sort of see this idea of the earth being destroyed, but then reborn again. You know, and that symbolism is present within so many things. I mean, it is present within almost all systems mythologies. I mean, we've noticed that with Osiris and Horus, with the risen Christ, with the myth of Hiram and Freemasonry. I mean, we can sort of, the symbol of the phoenix. I mean, we can go on and on of this whole entire mythologies of death and rebirth. So, you know, would I discount that kind of dualistic idea of kind of everything being destroyed and being reborn? No, I don't think I would discount that.
Now, it's interesting, Father Tony, I was looking here, Bishop kind of found this, in the Pistis Sophia 141, Jesus says, "For this reason I said to you, I have come to throw fire upon the earth. That is, I have come to cleanse the sins of the whole world by fire." So, there, you know, there was another perspective there, that the fire was, you know, to cleanse the world of its sin, though it doesn't speak necessarily of destruction. But of course, what could happen if we're talking about our understanding of matter, the way we relate to matter, if everything gets set ablaze, it's very possible that there could be a genuine destruction there. There's the destruction of our false understanding, our false relationship with what is around us. I think that that's very, very possible. Although, you know, as again, like Bishop Ken, I spent a great time in the Pentecostal churches as in my youth, and the way that was understood was that, you know, at the final judgment, Jesus was going to destroy heavens and the earth with fire, and then build a new heaven and a new earth. Do I think this means a literal physical destruction, or a destruction and rebirth of our system, our way of related to each other? I'm more inclined to go with the second, but that's the way I understand it.
You know, Tony, I don't know if I'm going to let you get off the hook on this. I mean, you posed the question, so I'm going to ask you maybe to jump in here for a second. Do you have any thoughts on this, Tony?
Well, when I talk about this passage, a lot of what I come to is that, that when we talk about the difference between matter and spirit, and the reason why I asked this question, is because what I think partly what you said, Bishop Peterson, what is our relationship to matter? And I think that the burning up of those attachments, the destruction of those attachments, is a very important part of what Gnosticism is all about. And so I think that that's partly what he's talking about here, and specifically the fact that the fire happens kind of in two stages. And as you know, in the Johannite Church, we use the symbol of the sacred flame as kind of our approximation of the divine spark that you see in the other Gnostic texts. And so that spark becomes a flame through attention and tending it and doing those kinds of things that you need to do in order to build up a fire. You can't just throw it out there and hope it goes. There's work that needs to be done. And so
absolutely
setting that flame and then setting that spark and then waiting until it becomes a flame and doing the things necessary, I think is a very important part of the Gnostic process.
Tony, I think you've got some great insight there. I mean, anyone who has ever been a Boy Scout or has ever camped out in the wilderness, who's had to maybe start a fire with a spark, with a knife and with the stone, and you get that little spark, or you're rubbing two sticks together to cause that friction, as you were talking about, lady, and you're causing that friction, and you finally get that little ember. You've got to give it some gentle breath, and then you've got to feed it some kindling, and then you've got to keep nurturing it till it's ablaze. And these are such important things as symbols for us to kind of examine what these mean for us, and how that really translates into and how we develop spiritually.
Absolutely.
Just phenomenal.
Yeah, and as Bishop Ken says, we could go on this for weeks.
We could.
We could, but we only have a few minutes here. So I do want a little bit of news. There has been a scholarship fund established in the honor of the Gnostic and religious scholar Marvin Meyer. The OC Register recently reported on this, and I think it's wonderful news. And they have already raised $150,000 for this scholarship fund. So certainly rest in peace, Professor Meyer, and I'm sure Bishop Ken and Father Tony are both very pleased to hear about this honor.
I think it's wonderful.
Bestowed on this wonderful man. So.
Yep. I think it is absolutely wonderful. I think that it is great respect to his memory and everything that he's done. And, I'm just, I'm very proud that this was established for him. I just want to remind our viewers to make sure that you leave your comments for us, either here on YouTube, on our Facebook page, or even by sending us comments to our email, which is talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com. Next week, we're going to have another exciting show.
Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about that one?
Brother Michael Stroyan, who is an absolutely wonderful young man who is involved in the Gnostic and esoteric movements, is going to be speaking about theurgy as a spiritual path. This young man really is a very thoughtful person, a beautiful human being, and he does a great deal of study. So I am so looking forward to having him as our guest next week.
I am really excited. Michael's a great young man. I'm proud to call him a friend and a fellow Gnostic. I mean, he's just a wonderful young man. I think it's going to be a great show.
It will be. It will be. So, as always, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. And this has, of course, been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends, click the like button, and subscribe to our channel. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the views of Gnostic NYC or any other organization. No animals were harmed during the production of this show. And for more Talk Gnosis, tune in every Wednesday for new episodes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you.